Today we're going to be doing an intro to web accessibility stream, and I just want to make sure everyone can hear me. So if anyone's in the chat, just let me know you can hear me and we'll get started. And I'll give an extra about 1 minute to let some other people filter in, and then we'll go ahead and get started on this training. All right, Andrew, the developer says we can hear you. Awesome. All right, how's everyone doing before we get started? Andrew, the developer, says, great over here. Accessibility is so important. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for being here. All right, so I'm going to get started pretty quickly today. And today we're going to be going over a training that I've done before, but this one is a little bit more robust and it has a little bit of extra information specifically geared to people who are just learning about web accessibility and really want to get started with making their websites more usable for everyone. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pull my PowerPoint up. And we will also be doing a little bit of demoing just to show you how to use some of the tools that we're going to use today as well. All right, so this is Testing Web Pages for Accessibility, our Intro to Web Accessibility training. I am an occupational therapist. I'm also an accessibility engineer and web developer, so that's kind of where my background is from. I got kind of into this by working with people with disabilities and helping them access technology using different assistive technologies, which we'll also go over. And I kind of fell down a rabbit hole of just wondering how the web worked with the assistive technology I was using with patients, and that's where I am today. All right, let's start. All right, so the first question we're going to ask ourselves is, what is web accessibility? That is what we're here for. All it is we're making our pages usable for everyone, and that kind of looks like making sure that people with permanent disabilities can use our pages, people with temporary disabilities, so things like injuries or illnesses, those people can use our web pages. And for people with situational impairments, and we'll cover what situational impairments look like. So those are the kind of like the three main people that we're trying to include in our websites. And through including all those people, you get to include pretty much everyone. We also want to make sure that our web pages can be used with assistive technology. All right, so why should we care? So we know what it is, but why should we even care about this? Why is this something that should be on the forefront of our minds whenever we are building? So the answer to that is many people are using our web pages, many different people with all kinds of different abilities. 20% of people actually have a disability. And the thing about it is a lot of people may not even tell you they have a disability. They may have a silent disability that's not obvious, but that they still are dealing with. So just something to consider. There are a lot of people who are using different assistive technologies like screen readers and magnifiers to use our pages, and we want to make sure that those things can be used. A lot of people may not be using a mouse. So I have my little mouse here, but a lot of people don't use a mouse due to fine motor impairments or cognitive delays. Sometimes it's just easier to tap on our keyboard and navigate that way by tabbing through for some people. So making sure that everything is tabbable and can be used keyboard only is pretty important. Some people may not be able to even see the screen, so they're using things like screen readers, which is a software that tells us what's on the screen by speaking it out. And if our pages aren't built so that the screen reader can understand what's on the screen, you're kind of not including all those people who are using that. Um, and the other thing about screen readers is just because someone's using a screen reader doesn't mean that they're blind. People with cognitive delays and dyslexia and things like that, or who may have problems with reading, they are also using screen readers. So just something to consider. You may be working with people who are not able to hear what's on your page, so just making sure you're including them. They may be using different software to make using your website easier, like using text to speech or speech to text, or magnifiers, like we talked about. Um, and we also have things like situational impairments. So I think this does a really good job of showing you the difference between like a permanent, a temporary, and a situational impairment. So people who maybe have full use of their body and their mind still have moments where they are impaired, right? So an example of that would be things like you're in a loud environment and you can't hear what's on the screen. You might want to have a different way of getting that information via text. You may be outside, and when you're outside, you get that glare on the screen. Now you can't even see your screen. So making sure that the way that we're kind of doing our pages are able to be used that way. Um, People may be having vision procedures. So people who may have gotten a procedure on their eyes and their eyes are dilated and they can't see, they're going to be using different ways of using your pages as well. So let's get specific about who we're talking about, who's benefiting from accessible web pages. Hey, Tucker Tech. All right, so the people who are benefiting from accessible web pages are, like we talked about, people with physical injuries, right? So you may have someone who has fine motor tremors or weakness or stiffness, and those people may not be using a mouse. They may be using that keyboard. We talked about keyboard only users. Um, Thinking about keyboard only users, also think about people who may have low reaction time or who are moving really slowly. So if you have something on your page that's going on and it requires like a quick reaction time, that may not be accessible for everyone. Another thing to consider are those with cognitive delays. So while we want to make sure that the way that we build our websites are accessible, we also want to make sure what we put on the website as far as like copy is accessible too. So just making things simple to read, easy to follow, not using a lot of jargon, not using a lot of run-on sentence, not like putting a bunch of text on the page without breaking it up into sections. That's something that you want to think about. So with hearing impairments, we're thinking about possibly adding captions, just making sure that whatever is on the screen isn't only being taken in by hearing. We want some visual cues about what's going on the page. If you have a video or you have a noise that is important to the page, or you need to hear it for you to use the page correctly, think about other ways of conveying that information. So low vision is a really big one. A lot of us have vision impairments, whether that be we use glasses or we, may not have a full field of vision. A lot of people use magnifiers. So when we're thinking about magnifiers, we're just making sure that everything on our page can be magnified up to 400%. So we want to make sure if I magnify my page 400%, is anything critical being lost? We want to make sure that it's still usable at that percentage. It seems like a lot, but a lot of people are using that. People are also using screen readers, like I said. And then another fun fact that I like to talk about a lot is astigmatism. 1 in 3 people have astigmatism. It's very common. And one of the things that you should consider with astigmatism is sometimes it's really hard for people with astigmatism to use dark mode. So developers, we love our dark mode. We love coding in dark mode. It makes us feel cool. I have astigmatism myself, and when I first started learning how to code, I put everything in dark mode because that's what everyone was doing. So why not, right? But once we do that, like what I found for myself was I had a hard time reading. It gave me headaches. It made me feel dizzy. I started not really wanting to be on the computer, and as soon as I put it back on light mode, I had a much easier time. This is not a global thing that really happens where everyone with astigmatism has a hard time with dark mode, but it is something to consider for at least having, if you have dark mode, at least have a mode where you can bring it to light mode, right? And Tucker Tech said, I have it and it's really annoying. I have the opposite problem. Light mode feels super bright. That's so interesting. Yeah, so I would say for astigmatism, we know like what it is our lenses are a little bit curved, and the way that light hits our eyes is different from the average eye. So that's why when we're thinking about how light hits the eye, anything with like a white background on black text, kind of like what I have here, that's really, it's going to be very extreme on the eye, or anything with like black background and white text will be very extreme on the eye. So in general, if you're using dark mode, you may want to use like more of a grayish color on white. And if you're using white mode, you might want to use more of a creamish color on black. And that may be a little bit easier on the eye. So everyone's different, but giving us different ways of viewing the page, I think is pretty important. So we also want to consider people who are neurodivergent. When we're talking about neurodivergent, we're talking about people with sensory sensitivities. So sensory sensitivities, we're talking about people who may be overwhelmed by light, noise, sounds, things like that. So just making sure you don't have a bunch of stuff all over your page that are making a bunch of noise or flashing or doing anything crazy like that. We may have people with epilepsy, talking about flashing or anything going on your page more than 3 times at a consecutive is a big no-no. We may have people who have dyslexia. So when we talk about dyslexia, we're thinking about, okay, something as simple as, what does my copy look like? What does my font look like? Like, a lot of fancy fonts are really hard to read. So keep it simple when it comes to font, especially if your web page is heavily used for just reading or copy. We also have folks with ADHD. That's like every millennial, it feels like, has ADHD, because it is what it is, right? So much of us have trouble focusing on what's on the page, and trouble with attention. So when you're thinking about ADHD, we're thinking about, okay, how is my page laid out? We talked about not having big blocks of text on the page. So maybe making sure that we have our headers correctly done, we have our sections clearly stated, and we have everything kind of small bullet points or chunks and easy to read. And then we also have autism, and that would be any of those things can kind of fall into autism, especially for sensory sensitivities and making sure things on the page are just not overwhelming. All right, so who can guess who else benefits from web accessibility? I'm just curious if anybody else has anything else that you think I may have missed. All right, I will tell you who else benefits from web accessibility. Literally everyone else is already on the page, right? So accessible design benefits everyone. If your page is usable for all of these different people, it's going to be usable for you, and it's going to be easier for everyone to use in general. So that's something I really want to take home and talk about, because we always think when it comes to accessibility that like this is an extra step that we have to do for people who aren't even using our page, but that's not really true, right? It's a lot of people have disabilities, and even those who don't may have those situational impairments where having different modes of accessing your web page will be helpful. All right, so now that we have like a kind of a general idea of what accessibility is and why it's important, who it's impacting, let's talk about how we start implementing it. I gave you a little bit of tips, but now we're going to dive really deeply into it. All right, so if we want to start with web accessibility as engineers making our pages better, we need to understand a few things. We want to understand the core principles of web accessibility. This will help guide you on how you look at your pages and is really, really good to know. We will lightly touch on Section 508 and the WCAG. So Section 508 would be more for our American people. This is a federal mandate. It's kind of like a law stating that we need to have all of our federal websites or anything that has to do with the federal government to be usable for everyone. And it uses the WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, as a guide for that. So we won't touch heavy on it because it's very overwhelming and it has over like 66 parts, but we'll talk about it very briefly. It's good to know. We also want to know how assistive technology works with the web browser, and then we're going to talk about the DOM and the accessibility tree. Those are some of my favorite things that I've learned because I didn't even know it was a thing. But just like we have a DOM that shows us what's going on our page, we also have an accessibility tree that uses that information from the DOM. We're going to briefly touch on ARIA. ARIA is just our accessible rich interface that gives extra information for our HTML so that screen readers specifically can read what's on the page and understand how to interact with like more interactive widgets. We also want to understand what critical accessibility issues are for web pages. So we'll go over like, these are the things that you definitely want to make sure you have on your page so that everyone can use it. And then we'll end with kind of a brief overview on how to test your pages manually, which is just you going through the page one by one to make sure things are accessible, and then some automated tools that we can use that will help us as we manually test our pages. All right, so let's get started with the core principles. The core principles of accessibility, we call them POUR. So that stands for perceivable, robust, operable, and understandable. Those are the things that we need our pages to be, right? So that everyone can use them. In these guidelines, we start with perceivable. So perceivable just means that everything on our webpage is available through sight, hearing, or touch, because those are the primary ways that people will be interacting with your page. We want to make sure that our pages are operable, and this just means that they're compatible with a keyboard or a mouse so that users who are only using those things can actually use them. We want to make sure that our pages are understandable, so pretty much being easy to comprehend. So we talked about making sure that we're not using a lot of jargon, making sure that we're not using a lot of big words that are not needed, no run-on sentences, making sure everything is organized and put on our page nicely. And then we want to make sure that our pages are robust. So this just means that they work across all of our browsers. They work with assistive technology. You can use them on a mobile device. You can use them on old devices and browsers. One of the things that we don't talk about a lot, but I think I just learned this, but most people around the world are using Internet Explorer, and we gag as developers, right? We're like, Internet Explorer, why are we using that? But a lot of people are still using that. So we want to make sure that everyone can use it, including people who are using the older versions of Internet Explorer. Some people, many people around the world don't even have they don't have a internet speed that's very high. So we want to make sure that whatever's on the page can be like, if it's important to the page, you don't need super fast internet to use it. So that means making it very simple and making sure that there are different ways to kind of use that information. All right, so let's talk about web accessibility laws and guidelines. When I talk about those things, I'm usually talking about Section 508, which is our American with Disabilities Act law. That was created, I believe, in 1998, and then they updated it pretty recently in about 2018. I want to say they updated it to make sure that everything was included in our modern times. And we also are going to briefly touch on the WCAG. All right, so web accessibility guidelines. So, primarily, what we're going to be doing is a lot of the things that we do are kind of guided by this web content accessibility guideline because they have the most, I think, robust set of guidelines out there. These are a set of standards. They were created by W3, and it is a technical standard for web accessibility. The thing about the WCAG is that it's super technical, super dry, and very long. So whenever people start here first, they get immediately overwhelmed and feel like, wow, why would I even want to like learn this or put it together? So I think when a lot of people approach it by just looking at these standards, it can be really, really hard to digest. It's not beginner friendly at all. And they have 13 guidelines that follow those core methods we talked about. They also give us testable criteria so that we can actually test our pages, and they give us like a standard to follow. On the other hand, we have Section 508, and this is part of the American Accessibility Law, like I said, created in 1998. It addresses information technology as a whole. So all federal government websites and technology and anybody who is contracting or working with the Fed has to follow these guidelines. And they're created with 20 sections that directly follow the WCAG, like I stated. All right, let's talk about assistive technology. Assistive technology is like my favorite thing to talk about. It's really fun. It's something that I use a lot and use a lot with patients, and this is kind of how I got interested in learning about it. So if this is directly from the American Occupational Therapy Association. So assistive technology is any item or a piece of technology or equipment or product system that is used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of individuals with disabilities. So this is, and let me make myself a little not on here, but this is I love this right here because it kind of shows you how different assistive technologies are used. So we usually start down here with low tech. Something as simple as like a pencil grip or highlighter tape or Velcro or a magnifier could be considered assistive technology. But typically, we're going to be up here in high tech as developers, really looking at things like screen readers and speech recognition and switches. So you see this person over here, they're using this green switch. They're not using a mouse. They're actually using something else that helps them interact with their computer. So as you can see, they're just using the keyboard. And then if they want to click on something or select something, they're just tapping on that switch. So why would somebody use something like that? This person looks like they're in a wheelchair. They may have some fine motor impairments that make it really hard for them to manipulate a mouse because it takes a lot of different muscles in the hand. And a switch would just allow them to kind of just tap and select rather than have to maneuver through that. Cognitively as well, for people with cognitive delays, using a mouse is a higher order function kind of where it requires a lot of different things from our bodies and our brain. So tapping the switch is just a lot easier. So we want to make sure that if anybody's using any of these things, text readers, speech to text, voice control, speech recognition, right? Screen readers. We want to make sure that they are able to use the website. So if you want to learn more about assistive technology, I definitely recommend you Google it or go on my YouTube and watch one of the videos that I have on assistive technology. It's really interesting to learn about. All right, so I put up here, screen readers are a big consideration for web accessibility. I want to keep hammering home that not only people who use these screen readers are blind, they also use them for various reasons. Me myself, when it came to like the patients that I was working with, a lot of them were actually using screen readers or screen reader like technology to help them understand what was on the page. So just keep that in mind. All right, so let's talk about the web accessibility tree. I will also show you all what that looks like. The web accessibility tree contains all the accessibility related information for most of the HTML elements on our page. It is housed in dev tools, which I will show you. And it takes the information from the DOM and it converts it into something that the assistive technology device can use. So it's literally taking the information kind of the way that we see it on the DOM, and then it's just like feeding it into whatever assistive technology we're using, which is usually a screen reader. So this is a really good like visual on how that works. Hopefully you can see it and it looks okay. But here's our HTML right here, right? We have HTML and the HTML is going to the DOM. We already know that, right? We've used the DOM before. The DOM kind of reads it and then it goes on to our page and we see it and we can interact with it. But for accessibility, what happens is the DOM tree is actually transformed into this accessibility tree with kind of the same information. And it's then read by the assistive technology and the user can read it as well. So since we're here already, let's switch gears a little bit and I'm going to pull up my project that I work on and I'm going to show you all how I use that. So I'm going to pull it up really fast and feel free to ask any questions as I'm pulling this up. Alrighty, so this is my project that I'm working on. It's a stretch break application. Many of you may be familiar with this because this is what I use when I'm live coding on stream. But pretty much on this web page, you're able to start a timer and then you're able to choose some stretches. Let's say we want to work on some neck stretches. It'll give you some neck stretches to try. So if we want to see how assistive technology would be reading this web page, one of the things we can do is we can go to our inspect tool, which will give us our dev tools right here. And then we can click on this guy right here. And I don't know if you can read it, but it says switch to accessibility tree view. So this is our HTML. So this is everything that's on our page right here. So if we're developers, we're pretty familiar with this. But if we click right here, boom, look at that. We have all of this information here that tells the screen reader what's on the page. So if we look at this, we should be able to read and see exactly what's on here. If something's not on here, then something's, not right. So looking at this, the screen reader would just read out everything, right? It'll tell us what's going on. We want to make sure that everything's focusable. And once we get into like the manual part of testing, I'll show you all this stuff and how to use it a little bit better. But I just want you to be familiar with the fact that you can just click inspect and then go to these dev tools and find what you need to find. And I primarily use Chrome. I'm not sure if it's different on a different platform, but I'm gonna have to look that up myself and learn that. All right. So we'll come back to this and use it as a demo to show you how we're gonna do some of that actual screening. But for now, we're gonna learn a little bit more of the basics. All right, so we're going to talk really briefly about ARIA. ARIA is accessible rich internet applications. So we use ARIA to help us with our HTML if HTML natively doesn't have what we need to convey what we're trying to use. Something to know about ARIA is we really don't want to use ARIA in general because HTML does typically have what we need. If you stick to semantic HTML and use all of the little tags that they have, those are more than enough for us to understand what's going on our page. But sometimes we need a little bit of extra. So ARIA gives us a set of roles and attributes that are added to elements to give assistive technology more information on what's on the screen. So a good example of that would be for a hamburger menu, right? And I won't get on my soapbox about hamburger menus today because that is a whole nother stream that we'll be doing together. But hamburger menus, if you just build a hamburger menu button, they are not accessible. Like no one can use it except for the people who understand what the hamburger menu is and who have a mouse that can click on it, right? So an ARIA label, while button is good, an ARIA label, if we add some information, then a screen reader could go on that and then be like, oh, okay, so this is actually a menu and it's a hamburger menu. It's not just like a random button that I don't know what's going on. And I'll also show you how the screen reader reads my page just so you have an idea of like how a screen reader is used and all that. So ARIA is kind of like CSS for assistive technology in that it paints a picture of what's on the page rather than just like spitting out whatever's on there. It tells you kind of like, are we on a widget? Are we on a form? Are we on a button? And when we think about buttons, the button HTML tag is usually enough for us to understand that we're on a button. But every so often we have like a more complex button for whichever reason where we're like, okay, we want to do something specific with this button, or this button is for a specific reason that is not clearly obvious. Okay. It also gives us good information like, is a form checked? Is it unchecked? Am I on an open hamburger menu? Am I on a closed hamburger menu? ARIA gives us all that extra information. ARIA was mostly made when HTML4 was out and they didn't have like, all the extra semantic HTML things that we can use now. Kind of like when everyone was using a div, but now we know, hopefully, now we know if we stuff everything in divs, that makes things pretty confusing. We may want to use the section header or a nav or a footer or, a side or an article section header, section tag so that people know where they are on the page. So we have a lot more tools now for screen readers and things like that to understand what's going on the page. So we don't really have to use ARIA that much, but we do have to know that it exists and that it's something that we can use to better convey what's on our screen. All right, like I said, general rule, I want to really say this because sometimes when we use ARIA, it makes it worse. It makes it even less navigatable for people. When in doubt, don't use ARIA, use semantic HTML. Once you have a little bit more knowledge and you know what you're trying to do, ARIA is a really great tool when you need it. Okay, so now that we have kind of like the basics down, we're going to talk about critical accessibility issues. These are the areas that we really need to be thinking about as we're building our pages. All right, so we want to make sure in general that anything that is auto playing and auto updating, no, we don't want to do that. We never want to make anything auto playing. We never want to make anything auto updating. We always want to give whoever's using our pages the option to start and stop anything interactive. flashing content. When in doubt, just don't use flashing content. It's distracting. It can possibly give someone a seizure. It's just not best practice. So if you feel like you need something to flash, think twice. The other thing we need to make sure is that we have keyboard access and focus. So that just means if we are on a web page, we're able to use the keyboard to tab through everything that's selectable, and that as we tab, there's a focus ring around everything so that we know where we are on the page. Okay, so your page should be able to be used entirely by keyboard, which is not always the case. And like I said, everything interactive should be on there. Another thing to consider is when you are tabbing through or when you're selecting things on the page, that color isn't the only thing that changes to tell you that you've moved to something else. And the reason we want to make sure of that is because like 1 in 8, or is it 1 in 12 men are colorblind. So if you're just using color to convey something important or convey that something has changed, they might not even know that something has changed. So an example of that would be if I click on a link and after I click on the link, it turns purple instead of the black that it was. That would not be even like someone who's colorblind wouldn't know the difference, right? Some other critical accessibility issues. We always want to make sure that we have alt text on all of our images except for decorative images. So if we have a decorative image that doesn't convey anything important, we don't want to just leave it blank with no alt. We want to put alt and then just have the quotes as blank. Just leave it blank. Don't put anything within the quotes. The reason we want that is because if a screen reader sees that, it'll just skip over the picture. But if it doesn't see that, it'll see an image and it'll say image, and then it won't know what's there. So the person on the other side of the screen is going to be like, okay, I know there's an image here, but I don't know what the image is. When if you just left it blank with the image alt text blank, then it would just skip over it and it wouldn't be like a thing where someone's like, okay, well, what's on the page? I don't understand what's going on here. Another thing is we want to make sure that our contrast ratios are good, making sure that we use some type of contrast checker because a lot of people do have vision impairments and maybe having a hard time reading what's on our page just because they can't kind of see the background versus the letters because they're too similar in color. That's something that is really, I think, something that a lot of us don't do. And I myself also didn't do it as well. And a lot of my pages, I had to go back and be like, oh, wow, yeah, this is actually, the contrast ratios are so poor that I don't understand what's going on the page if I don't have excellent vision. We talked about the use of semantic HTML. That's pretty important just so screen readers can be used correctly and understand what's on the page. We want to make sure we have the proper headings, that we're using things like main, nav, and section to convey what is on the page. And we talked also about making sure that your page can be zoomed in at 400%. And then not using color or images to convey messages without alternatives. So sometimes we may be kind of tempted to use an image to explain something. If you do that, make sure the alt text is robust enough to understand what's there. And if we have something like a failure alert or something like that, that it's not just like turning red to show that it's failed, that we also have like some text to tell us what's going on. The other thing that we should be considering is if we have any links, that the links are explicit in where they take you. So something like click here is not good enough. So click here should never be used. We should always be kind of putting where this link is going to take us. So if we have a link that's going to take us to a PDF about accessibility, instead of putting click here, we'd put accessibility PDF or something, just to so that we know exactly what we're clicking on. Because people who are tabbing through may only be tabbing to like those clickable links, and if they have no context, they're not going to know what's going on there. Also, for people with cognitive delays, it's just much better to be explicit about what you're doing. All right, so the fun part. Let's talk about manual and automated testing tools. So, this is our hands on auditing and testing that you can do yourself to make sure that your pages are accessible. So, to test for web accessibility, obviously we need some good understanding of HTML and CSS. A little bit of JavaScript does help. And if we're here already and we're full stack engineers who are watching this, we definitely know JavaScript or something like it. So knowing that is very good to know. We're going to talk about keyboard testing. We're going to try a screen reader today. Some of the screen readers that you can download yourself, I'm going to kind of tell you what those are. So one to know about would be JAWS. JAWS is what most people who've been blind for like a lot of their life use. It's the most robust, but it's also the most expensive. I think it's like $400 or something like that. So I don't really recommend it for people who are just like casually using it. What I would recommend is using whatever comes with your computer. So for me, I have a Mac. I use VoiceOver for Mac. It's free. Um, there's also Narrator for Windows that's free. The best one, though, if you have a Windows computer, would probably be NVDA. They're open source and pretty simple to use. So just either use what you have on your computer or download NVDA and try it out. Close your eyes and turn on the screen reader and see if your page can be used that way. Um, some of the other things that we're going to need is we'll need some type of web page magnifier. Usually our browsers have a magnifier in it, and that's fine. We also want to think about some color contrast checkers. Oops. And we also want to use some browser accessibility checkers. So the ones that I use are Axe Dev Tools by Deck. There's also Wave, which is by WebAIM, and Lighthouse, which comes in the Google Chrome. So those are the ones that I like to use, and some of the things that you can use to test your page. As far as the color contrast checker, the one that I use is called Contrast with an E at the end. I believe it's only for Mac though. So if you use anything like Wave or Lighthouse, they typically do have some color contrast checkers in them. All right. So now that we know the tools that we need, um, kind of where we start would be with manual testing. So I'll show you all of this. First, we're going to want to tab through our website and make sure that that we can use everything. We're going to make sure we can be zoomed in 400%. We're going to make sure we can use a screen reader. We're going to check pictures for alt, make sure our headings are semantically structured, and then our contrast ratios are good. And then for automated testers, we're going to kind of go through those. These are just good for catching little things quickly. They're not robust. They don't catch everything. They're a horrible thing to use if you're trying to do like a full on testing. Never just use those. But if you just want to look at something quick and fix some quick things, they're great to use and good to start with. And then we talked about all of these different ones. All right, so let's try testing our own pages. If you're here with me and you want to start testing your own pages, I would definitely encourage you to download some of those tools that I talked about and to pull up your own pages and use those automated tools. So we'll do this all together. So I'm going to pull up my own page. And we're going to use that as an example. All right, and if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I will answer them. All right, so if I am trying to look at my page and test it, the first thing I would do, me personally, is I would just see whether or not my page can be tabbed through. And one of the things I just realized is this is like the what I have up, and this is not my accessible page. So maybe that'll be good to use. But I do have an accessible page on my in my code. So actually I'm gonna open my code as well. I should have had that open already. All right, so I use VS Code and I'm gonna open up my stretch break and this is my code. I'll update that later. And then let's just open up, put it right here. And where is my command? Nope, that's not what I want. Hold on. All right, so here we go. This is just good to have up. And put the rest of this stuff up. All right, so the first thing I'm gonna wanna do is tab through. So I'm just gonna literally hit the tab button and see if everything, yep, looks like I'm able to tab through. Let's see if I can click on something and start it. Yep, looks like I can start. And as you're here, you can see pressing start for this does not work. It like messes up my whole thing, and that's something that I have to fix, but we can reset it. Press reset, and then let's see if I want an eye one. Yep, that works. Neck, yep, that works. Shoulder works. Hands work. All right, everything is tabbable. It's good because everything has a focus, right? That's nice and big. All right, the other thing I want to check, oh, look at that. When we are actually using our mouse, we're being conveyed that we're on something with more than just color. It's also being highlighted. Let's see down here. Oop, there goes a problem, right? I'm clicking on this and the only thing that's changing really is the color. So if I'm colorblind, I may not realize, right, that I'm actually on something. So that's something that I would have to change. And today we're not going to be doing any really like live coding to change anything. If you want to see how I change some of this stuff, there's already a stream for that. But I just want to kind of show you like some things to consider, right? So, all right, everything's tabbable. Let's see. Let's look at what we have on here that we wanted to make sure of, right? Tabbable, cool. All right, so let's see if we can zoom in 400% and everything doesn't break. Oh, no wonder. I'm like, why is my page so tiny? All right, so this is actually how it looks. Hey, Dan, I'm doing good. We're just hanging out here, learning a little bit about the basics of web accessibility. Thanks for hanging out. All right, so this is how my page actually looks, guys. It's not like all tiny how it was. I don't know why it was that tiny. But now that we're at 100%, we can see how it works, how it looks. And let's crank up the volume. Let's do 400%. Oh my gosh, 400%. Okay. Yes, We can see everything and we don't need horizontal scroll. Yes. Oh my gosh, you guys don't know how long it took me to figure this out. Okay, I just want to let you know it took a long time. So, one of the things we kind of want to make sure is that if we do put it on 400%, we don't need to horizontally scroll to find things. And as you can see, real tears right now, we don't need to horizontally scroll. And we're able, yep, we can still get here, look at everything. Yes, go me. Y'all don't understand. All right, cool, 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 cool. All right. So the second thing that I would do at this point is I would break out the good old screen reader and just make sure the screen reader can read what's on the page. Let's do that together. So I use VoiceOver. So I'm gonna just open up VoiceOver and we're gonna see what happens. Let's see if VoiceOver can actually understand what's happening here. All right, so here's VoiceOver. I want you all to see exactly what it looks like. All right, so here's VoiceOver. Says VoiceOver is on, great. So what I'm gonna do is make sure I'm where I wanna be, and I'm just gonna press Command F5. That starts
VoiceOver on Chrome.
Reader.
Your stretch break. Google Chrome, Africa coding, window. Testing for accessibility, Google Slides, tab, group. You are currently on a tab, group, inside of a group. To select this option, press Control, Option, Space, entering your stretch break web content. Visited, link, home, navigation. You are visited, link, my stretch collection. You are visited, link, login. You are visited, link, logout. You are visited, link, sign up. Start button. Pause button. Reset button. Eyes button. Neck button. Shoulders button. Hands button. Visited link. Create profile. You create profile button. You are visited link. List 3 items. You are currently on a link. To click this link, press Control, Option, Space.
All right, we found a problem already, and this is something we talked about on previous streams. When we have logos as a clickable link, we need to make sure that this is kind of where that ARIA would come into play. If we had the correct ARIA on here, it would be able to tell us you're on a link. You're on a link for YouTube. This goes to YouTube. But because I didn't finish that right now, because this is like the actual live and not what's on my code, it's not able to do that. So if we just go to, I'm just going to show you what the code looks like right now.
Main.css, my stretch break, window. Main.css, edit text, voiceover off.
I'm going to turn voiceover off for a second just to show you what I'm talking about. All right. So if we go in here, what we're looking at is these logos, and the logos are, where are we? Right here, right? And these icons don't really tell us anything right now. So that would be something that we would need to change. And that would be a different stream. But for now, at least you know, because I use a screen reader, I know that this is not an accessible link, right? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a screen reader to read the entire page. What I was doing just now was just letting the screen reader read whatever I focused on. But we want to make sure that when we get on this page, the screen reader can read the whole thing, right? So let's pull up our screen reader again. And I'm going to press Command F5.
VoiceOver on Chrome. Your stretch break, Google Chrome, Africa coding, window. Testing for accessibility, Google Slides, tab, group. You are currently on a tab, group, inside of a group. Yourstretchbreak.com. Your stretch banner. Visited link, image, logo. Visited link, home. Visited link, my stretch collection. Visited link, login. Visited link, logout. Visited link, sign up. Heading level 1, your stretch break. Enjoy these gentle movements specially curated for tech professionals and computer users. First, start the timer. Then, pick a stretch. Woman at desk with laptop and thought bubble with caption time for a break. Image. Heading level 2, 1. Start timer. Image. 500. Start button. Pause button. Reset button. Heading level 2, 2. Choose a body part to stretch. Eyes button, neck button, shoulders button, hands button. Hold or gently move through each pose for 3-5 breaths. Woman seated with hands together at chest image. Heading level 2, your stretch collection. Save photos from the stretch bank to create your own routine. Coming soon. Upload photos of your own to create a bank of your favorite movements on your profile. Available now. Note, this web app is in beta testing. Visited link. Create profile. Man adapt using computer with text bubble. Less rest pain. More coding. Image. Horizontal splitter. About the creator of your stretch break. List 3 items. Visited link. Visited link. Visited link. Africa is a full-stack software engineer, yoga teacher, and licensed occupational therapist. She hopes that this web application will help professionals who use the computer for prolonged periods stay limber and ready to take on their next challenge. Built with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Node.js, and MongoDB. Copyright Sign Africa, Kenya, 2022. Grammarly integration group. Left brace. Mode. Full. Voiceover off.
All right, so the good thing about this is it showed us that most of the things on the page can be accessed. However, this nice row of buttons right here are not accessible. Another thing to show y'all that I want you to consider, because so many of us use hamburger menus, right now my hamburger menu, let's see if we can even use it. Okay, so if I had no use of my hands for a mouse at least, and I'm only using the keyboard, can I tab and open up my hamburger menu as it stands? This is just like regular code that everyone uses, primarily if they're trying to build a hamburger menu really fast. mm, I don't know. It seems like, nope, it skips straight to the start button. So if someone was using a screen reader for my website, they would not be able to navigate through here. So that is something that we definitely want to think about, because so many of us use it and build these hamburger menus that are not accessible. So good thing to think about. So now that we've done the manual testing and we have a general idea of like what's going on our page, I'm going to show you some of the things that you can use to automatedly, whatever, test what's on your screen. Okay, so the ones that I like using Wave. So if you just download Wave, it's a Chrome extension. Um, Once you click on it, it'll tell you what the errors on your page are. So I got rid of a lot of my errors. There were a lot more here, that you can see if you watch other streams. But right now, the only one that's showing up as like a true error would be something is missing from my links. Let's see if we go here, we press this. It's telling us one of my form controls don't have a label. And this is important because when you don't properly do that, the function of the form is confusing for people. So that is something to think about. Usually, the other things that pop up would be things like whether or not our HTML headings are correctly placed in the right place. Um, let's see what else it tells us. It's giving us 4 alerts. Let's see, suspicious alternate text. I think it's doing that because it's like a logo, and sometimes it'll be like, do you really need to put that you have a logo here? And for me, I wanted to do that, so that's fine. Redundant links are another thing to think about. So it's telling me that I have a redundant link because if you click on my logo, it takes you to home. And then right next to that, we have a home button that also takes you to home. So that's kind of redundant, but it is kind of standard that that's how web pages are kind of made. So it's something that I kept there, and it's not like an actual error. It's just something to consider if you do that elsewhere on the page. So I don't have a lot of errors here. Actually, a good one to look at would probably be my portfolio page, because I'm still working on this. So let's see what. Dang, I guess I did work on this. Sorry, no errors. That's good for me. All right, let's pick a different one. I want to pick one. Oh, I know what I can do. So fun fact, there are a group of lawyers and people going around suing websites for not being accessible. And one of the targets that they target are anime websites. So if you go on any anime website, right? I'm just going to put anime website and click like the first one. If you go on any of these websites, they're usually like really not accessible and a bunch comes up. So, wow, I'm like picking the ones where this guy was probably sued and he fixed his website. The last time I showed one, it was like really bad. I was like, oh my gosh. All right, let's go on this one maybe. Let's see if a lot pops up. So this one has 8 errors and 76 alerts. And let's see what it says for the errors. So they don't have alternative text, they don't have labels, they have a bunch of empty links, they have contrast errors. So this gives you a good example of kind of what it's finding on the pages, right? So if we go back to my page, I'm going to show you another one. So if we go to inspect, oops, wrong thing. We can also find our Axe Dev tools. Okay. And we can scan all of the page and it's going to analyze some things. Okay. And oh, it's telling me that my zooming is disabled. And then it'll kind of tell you where to look for on here. Oh, look at that. It's found something on mine. User scalable. No, that's weird. All right, let's see if we can fix that real fast because I really don't want it to do that. Okay, so it shows me where it is. So that means I can pop over here and, ooh, look at that right here. That's a no-no. We don't want to put user scalable. No, we want to put user scalable. Yes. So that means people can scale what they need to scale. And usually when I'm doing this, I'm showing you live, like using one of my accessibility branches on coding, but I'm not doing that today. And then we could see it like change to show that I actually fixed it, but not today. Let's see, links must have discernible text. Yep, here we are. So it's finding these and it's like, hey, these are the logos that we talked about here. They're not usable right now. So it's telling us how to fix it too, which is why I really like this one. Okay, and then our elements and tab owner order don't have accessible text. All right, cool. So this is just to show you that you have these tools that will literally show you what's going on and they don't all find the same thing. So that's why we're using different ones, right? So I use about 3 different ones, including the Google tools to make sure that I catch everything because manual testing doesn't really catch everything and the automated doesn't really catch everything. So we use all of them together to make sure that whatever is on our page is good. All right, so that is kind of the basics. I think this gives you a really good place to start. The last thing I want to show you is how to check your color contrast. Remember, you can just Google like color contraster and use one. Some of these tools do come with one and will tell you if your page has some things that are not the right contrast ratio. However, the ones that are automated don't always pick everything up. So make sure you're using a contrast program that you can do manually. Okay, so for this one, I like it because you can just click on the background and then click on something else to kind of show whether or not it's usable. So right now you can already see that this right here fails. So this would be something I would have to go into my code and change to make it a little bit darker because this may be hard for people to kind of see that I have this around here. Let's check to see if my contrast ratios are okay for my text. Because that's usually the one that I'm most worried about. And we kind of already know that black on white is going to be good. So it says great. That's great. Sometimes we also do it for pictures, but not as much we mostly are doing this to make sure that our text is readable. It's also good to have our pictures readable, but they're less important than the text. So that's a good thing to understand. All right, so let me make sure that that I showed you a good example of everything. Looks like we covered most of the things that we would kind of need to look at. All right, good. So this should be a pretty good start for you to start at least considering what's going on with your web pages, how to use some of these different tools, and ways that you can fix what's on your page to make sure everyone can use it. If you want to learn more, just go ahead and follow me on Twitch. I'll be periodically working on actual live streaming and live coding, so you can see how I am changing some of these things and really see the engineering part of it, how we're going to be doing that. So I hope that this was helpful for you. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We'll be talking a little bit more about this. But yeah, this is, I think, a great place to start if you want to start making your pages usable for everyone. Alrighty, my friends, I will see y'all next time. I hope that this was informative. See y'all.